In this video, we are going to see how to use Metis with StackGres. Metis is a live database observability tool that can connect to your SQL Server instance and extract details about the server activity, including infrastructure metrics, databases, schemas, live queries, indexes, transactions, and everything else you need. Metis can also provide insight into how to optimize the things, how to make them run faster, and how to troubleshoot issues automatically whenever they appear. StackGres, on the other hand, is a solution for deploying the PostgreSQL server on your Kubernetes cluster. So it is an operator that can take care of the deployment and management of your PostgreSQL server instance. So what we are going to do in this video is we are going to create a Kubernetes cluster using Minikube. We are then going to install the StackGres operator and create the PostgreSQL server instance. And then we are going to connect Metis to it to see and get the live monitoring. Everything I am going to show you is also on our blog, and all the commands I am executing are explained over there. Actually, I will be using that blog to walk us through, so feel free to take a look at that blog and do everything I do here. So the very first thing we need to do is we need to create a Kubernetes cluster. I am going to use Minikube for that, but you are welcome to use any tool you want, for instance, Kind, or for instance, AWS EKS, or whatever else you have over there. I'm using Minikube just because it's convenient. I have my Minikube installed already on my machine, so I'm not going to install it, but there is a link to documentation explaining how to do it on your operating system, whether it's Windows, Linux, or Mac OS. It should work everywhere. And this basically goes down to downloading the binary and installing it. The next thing we need to do is we want to create the Minikube, use Minikube to create the Kubernetes cluster. So let's copy Minikube start. Let's go to my shell window and let's execute this command. This thingy is now creating the Kubernetes cluster using Docker. I have Docker installed as well, and it's going to use 2 CPUs and like 4 gigs of memory to basically run everything. It will take time depending on your configuration, depending on your host. Should be probably something like 30 to 60 seconds. Obviously, your mileage may vary. At the very end, this command will also configure kubectl. So you have your kubectl already configured to interact with your Kubernetes cluster. What we now need to do is we need to install the StackGres operator. Operator is a thing that can take your Kubernetes cluster and install stuff inside the cluster and manage how they behave. The operator can, for instance, check the drifts, apply configurations, and make sure that everything is up and running properly. To install StackGres operator, we can use Helm. Helm is yet another tool that is capable of installing things in your cluster. I have Helm installed already on my machine, so I'm not going to do that. But once again, there is a documentation which you can follow. It should work on Windows, Linux, Mac OS, everywhere. And it basically goes down to downloading targz, untarring it, and then moving the binary to appropriate place. So once you have Helm, what we need to do is we need to add the repository which indicates where the StackGres operator is. So Helm will know where to download it from and how to use it. So we want to add the StackGres repository. So let's do it. And then once we have that, we can start installing the operator in and also create a new namespace called StackGres, just to keep all the things in one place. So let's run this command. And this command is now going to the repository, downloading the StackGres operator, and triggers the installation of the operator in the Kubernetes cluster. And then things need to be initialized in the background. So we can get yet another command that was just synchronously wait for everything to complete. So we can run this command, and once this command finishes, then we see that we'll have the operator up and running and ready for us to be used. So let's give it a little bit to complete, and then we'll see what has been installed and configured on our Kubernetes cluster. So we can run yet another command to basically get all the pods from the StackGres namespace. We run this command, and you can see we have operator up and running and ready to be used in our Kubernetes cluster. So now what we need to do is we need to use the StackGres operator to create the PostgreSQL Server instance. We also need to configure the server so that Metis can use it. So we need to grant proper permissions, install extensions that Metis needs, and everything else. So let's go back to the instruction. So very first thing we need to do is we need to create a username and a password. So we are going to create the username Metis, and with password admin123. Obviously, feel free to use different password. Do not go with defaults. And this is the user that Metis will use to monitor your cluster, your database server. Once we have that, what we now need to do is we need to create a script that will initialize the server appropriately on the first run. So in this script, we are going to create the user with password. We are going to grant PG monitor permissions to this user, to Metis. We are then going to create a database named Metis and make the Metis user owner of the database. Then we are going to grant connect permissions to user Metis. And finally, we're going to create the extension named pgstat_statements that Metis uses behind the scenes to monitor your database. So let's copy this command and create this script. This command is for bash shell. So if you are using different shell like PowerShell, batch, or whatever else, you may need to adjust the syntax. However, in bash, it works just like that, copy and paste. So we have now created the script. What we now need to do, we need to create the configuration and trigger creation of the SQL Server. So what we need to do is we want to create a cluster that has Postgres version 15.0 with 5 GB volume and using the script that we have just created. So once again, let's copy this command and let's run it. And this thingy is now going to use StackGres operator to create the server and initialize it accordingly. It's gonna take something like 1 minute on my box, and we can monitor the progress using this get pods command. So we can come here and see that the cluster is now being created and initialized. What is happening now is the StackGres operator that we installed using Helm is now creating and installing the PostgreSQL server, and then the server will initialize everything using the script that we created a little earlier. And this script will create the user that uses the username and password that we also configured as secrets in our cluster. So let's run this command again, and let's see that pod is now initializing. Let's wait a couple of more seconds, and we should then see that everything is up and running, meaning that the PostgreSQL server is up and running and initialized properly with the script that we triggered. And you can see now everything is ready to be used. We can verify the database has been created properly with this command that will list all the commands, all the databases. And you can see there is database Metis with owner Metis. So all is good. What we need to do now is we already have the server created with StackGres. And now what we want to do is we want to use Metis to live monitor the server. So we need to go to Metis application. If it's your first time, then you need to log in and then go to monitoring, and you can now click deploy. This wizard will walk you through all the steps that you need to do to deploy Metis Docker container and to live monitor your database server. Because we are hosting Postgres locally, I am going to click Postgres over here and then click Next. And then Metis tells me how to configure my database server so that Metis can use it. And it asks us to create the pgstat statement extension, create the new user, grant PG monitor operator and grant connect to the database. So all the things that we have already done when specifying the initialization script for the StackGres operator for the SQL Server. So I can click next. And what I now need to do is I need to provide a connection string on how to connect to the database. So we can come back to the blog post and we can see that there is a command that will list all the services running in our cluster. And one of the services is the cluster primary with the external host name that we can use in the connection string. So this host name is cluster.stackgres.svc.cluster.local. So this is basically the server name as we can see it within the cluster. So the connection string that we need to use is as follows, and we can copy it right here. We want to connect to Postgres using username Metis, password admin123, to the database, to the server name that we just copied from the cluster, using the default port 5432, to the database named Postgres, although Metis will try to connect to all the databases that we have over there, and to disable SSL, TLS basically. So this is what we need to do. Now we click next, and we can either run this command using Docker or Helm. Since we are using Helm to deploy things in our cluster, we are going to use Helm here as well. So we need to copy this repository command that is going to add the repository for Metis to get the MMC. So we can add this repository, and this repository has been now added. And the next thing we need to do is we need to copy this command that is going to install MMC. So you can see this command is going to install MMC using the API key. And this API key will be different on your end because, well, it's for your Metis project, and using the connection string that we see here. There is one more tweak that we need to do because we deployed everything in namespace StackGres. We also need to extend this command to use the namespace StackGres. So we can now run this command, and now you can see that MMC was deployed to the namespace StackGres, and it's now initializing. Once again, we can actually click down here, and we can come back to the instructions. And once again, we can try getting all the pods to see whether things are up and running. And once we run this get pods, you can see that there is MMC deployed, and it's running properly. So what happens is at this point, we have the MMC up and running in our cluster, and MMC can now connect to the database. So MMC, Metis metadata collector, can connect to your server and provide you with live monitoring. So we can come back to the monitoring page, we can refresh this page, and now what we should see is we have a new server that is cluster StackGres-as-a-Service cluster local, and you can see that it has two databases, one of them being the default Postgres, the other one being the database Metis. Also, Metis started collecting various metrics and configurations. You can see that we do not have data yet. It is just because we have just created the observability agent. But for instance, we already have configurations. So for instance, we can check your Postgres configuration, and we can give you insights how to reconfigure the server for the best possible performance. What we also can do is we can go to the database, and we can see that we started capturing metrics, and they will start flowing in every minute, and we started capturing other things around. So what we can do now is let's create a table, let's put in some data, and let's see whether Metis can capture that. So what we can do now is we can run a command that will basically run create table. So let's run this. So we created a table. We can then run a command that will basically insert some products to the table orders that we have just created. And then we can also run another command that will do some select statement just to see whether we have the data. And you can see that, yes, we do have some data, we have some products and sample entries. And now what we can do is we can come back to our monitoring and we can refresh the page, and we can actually see that Metis is running things every minute. So last time it updated data like 7 seconds ago. So let's see if it managed to capture the table that we've just created. We can already see that connections started flowing in. So let's click on Metis, and you can see there's this orders table that we have just created, and also we started getting some data points for transactions, rows, and other stuff. So this is how you can integrate Metis, and Metis will now start analyzing the things that happen in your cluster. For instance, it will analyze schemas when it has some more data. It can even analyze like live queries that go to your database. So all of that available out of the box once you connect the Metis observability agent to your server. If you're interested in learning more, then obviously feel free to take a look at runbooks or our guides, or join our Metis Discord channel so we can speak with you and we can discuss various things about databases. Also, you're welcome to join StackGres community to learn more about that. And being all of that said, I hope you like what you saw and you will start using Metis. Thank you for watching.